All right, what do conservatives actually think of Vladimir Putin and Russia? Well, we're going to find out. We brought one of them on. John Ziegler, podcaster, commentator, columnist, and conservative. John, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. You introduced me almost like I'm a foreign alien.
Yeah. We found one in the wild, and we've corralled one, and it's joined us. So, John, you speak for all conservatives. No, seriously. The funny thing is, and the reason why you're on is because you don't. You're an interesting person. You have your own opinions. I disagree with a lot of them, but sometimes we do see eye to eye. And so, kidding aside, I know that there's a variety of opinions about Putin and Russia in Republican circles, and ever-changing ones, by the way. But to me, it looked like Trump was very soft on Putin. I'm curious what your take on that is, and then we'll talk about the current state of affairs.
I agree with you that Donald Trump was very soft on Putin and Russia, although he's kind of crafty about it, where he takes almost every position that is imaginably possible. Therefore, he gives his cult options. That's, I think, always been one of the keys to Trump's success with his cult. And it is a cult, as you well know. He gives them options. So if they want to believe he's pro-Putin, they can believe that. If they want to believe he's actually secretly anti-Putin and playing him, they can believe that. That's, I think, the key. And I think that's also the key to understanding why the reaction to this conflict with Ukraine has been a bit muddled on the right wing, because everyone in the cult is trying to predict what the cult leader wants them to do or say. And especially with Trump, that's often not difficult. And you've already alluded to it. It is kind of changing. It has already changed in the last several days as this narrative has become very, very popular, I think, on parts of the left and the right, that we're supposed to be rooting for Ukraine and that Putin is the bad guy. While that's certainly not universally the case in the right, I do think that that's an increasingly popular position, largely because that's where the public is.
Yeah. So look, first of all, to the audience, before you get to liking John because he called Trump's followers a cult, you'll dislike him later. Don't worry. He's an actual conservative. But to back up what you're saying though, but honestly, look, that's what successful politicians do. They talk out of both sides of their mouth, so that they give people an option of, I can believe A or I can believe B, and I still am going to vote for this guy. By the way, a guy who was super sophisticated in doing that was Barack Obama. Okay, 1,000 times more sophisticated than Trump, but oftentimes would say two things at once. So now, getting to a theory that I had that I think that you might not have loved. I said outside of Trump, there's another reason why some right-wingers like Putin. It's because he is basically saying, I don't care what anybody thinks, I don't care what LGBTQ folks, I don't care about that, I'm gonna oppress them, etc. And I'm not gonna be woke, and he's white. He's a strong man who's white. And now for a lot of right-wingers, race, in my opinion, is more important than nationality. And that's why we saw the shirts at Republican gatherings saying, I'd rather be a Russian than a Democrat, because they perceive Democrats as the others, but Russians, they look kind of like us. And so there's some evidence to that effect since I've said that. But first, let me let you weigh in. Am I wrong about that?
Well, look, are there some people in that category? I guess there probably are. Unfortunately, human beings are incredibly flawed. There's going to be very flawed people in every large group. I am not one of those. I would like to believe that that is not a significant portion. If it was the case, then why do conservatives hate Trudeau in Canada or Newsom here in California? They're both authoritarian leaders who have usurped democracy. So I don't know that race. I don't know that race necessarily would play a role there then, because obviously conservatives hate Trudeau and Newsom, and so I'm not making the 100% parallel, but you were the one that raised the issue of race, and certainly there's some things that race does not wash over on the conservative side. Look, I'm a Reagan Romney Republican. One of the last few here in Southern California. And to me, the Russians are always going to be the bad guys unless proven otherwise. And Putin has always seemed to me as if he is a bad guy. And it's nice that you guys are now finally acknowledging to some extent that Romney was right back in 2012 and that he got a raw deal on this topic. But I'm certainly not going to speak for or in any way defend those that might have your opinion. And I'm not suggesting that no one has that particular opinion, because we're living in very crazy times where people are believing all sorts of nutty things.
And so just to be clear, we don't think that right-wingers just love all white people. They don't love Joe Biden. I've heard them cheer on a guy named Brandon. That gives me a sense of what they think about Joe Biden. No, of course they don't like Trudeau or Newsom or Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, et cetera. No, white right-wingers who are authoritarian in nature and run over their opposition, Trump, Putin, et cetera. That seems to really.
In all seriousness, I believe that the only affinity, the real affinity for Putin, is that the Trump cult members believe that Trump is Putin's buddy. That is the source of it. It's not mostly racial. It's mostly that their cult leader they see as sending them signals that Putin isn't a bad guy and might actually be the good guy, which is why Trump was trying to do business with him in 2016 as the presumptive Republican nominee, and then covered it up by, among other things, having his private lawyer go to Congress and perjure himself. So to me, that's the far more logical explanation than race.
Yeah, I think that's how it started, but it's definitely morphed, because after I made the comment and people were outraged, then Nick Fuentes had a white supremacist gathering, and they started chanting Putin, Putin, and it was specifically about race. And so, and we've seen now also not just race, but gender issues, et cetera, so any social issues. Steve Bannon, Eric Prince talking about, hey, at least Putin isn't woke. Tucker Carlson saying Putin never racially discriminated against me, and all that stuff. So it's taken on that side of it, which then leads me to the larger question. Where do you think conservatives are today? Okay, let's grant that it started with Trump, right, and his own personal business interests. But in polling, it looks like Republicans have begun to turn against Putin. They were neutral in an earlier poll. Now they're against him in a poll after the invasion. But they're still trailing Democrats by 15 points, which leads to this Alice in Wonderland, where a guy like you who just said you're predisposed to just not liking or agreeing with the Russians to begin with is kind of an odd man out, and Republicans generally like Russia more than Democrats do.
It is very strange. We are living in very bizarre times. I would like to believe that that difference will dissipate as the reality on the ground becomes more well known. And I also think popular opinion, which is pretty clear so far, plays a role here, because Republicans are going to see the handwriting on the wall, and they're going to not going. Most of them are not going to do anything that appears to be remotely pro-Putin. So I would like to believe that this is going to eventually be one of the very few topics in this day and age where Republicans and Democrats can somewhat be on the same page. It is sad that that is not currently the case. It is pathetic that there are more Republicans that are pro-Putin in Russia than Democrats. Everything is upside down, but hey, that's 2020. 2022. I feel like we're stuck in 2020 forever.
Yeah, well, I mean, on good news, you say from your mouth to God's ears. On this one, the opposite, okay? But no one wants to be stuck in 2020 forever, but it does feel that way. So, I have a theory on why in the polling you can see the Republicans now shifting, going, okay, yeah, Putin's a bad guy, we get it, right? And that's not good. I think that that they saw the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians, by the way, in my theory, are also white, right? Well, that's not my theory, that's definitely true. And then they see guys like that they might even recognize, like the Klitschko brothers, who were heavyweight champions, saying, I'll grab a gun and I'll fight the Russians in the streets, but I'm staying. And the Ukrainians have been so tough. Jesus, they've been awesome in their bravery. And I think that that's appealing to the kind of the macho man side of Republican voters. What's your take on that?
That's a fair theory. I mean, Zelensky certainly is appearing to be far more of a man than Trump ever dreamed of being, and I find it interesting that that's appealing to Democrats, that he's now this hero sex symbol. When last week, by the way, let's not forget, the New York Times wrote an article mocking him for being in way over his head. So it's amazing how fast the narrative can change with the public opinion. But I do think there's one point of caution here for you guys. I'm sure you're aware that in a poll over the weekend, 62% of the public believes that Putin would not have done this if Trump was still president. Now, I find that rather bizarre given the relationship between Trump and Putin, but that's perception, and perception is far more important than reality. And so I'm not sure this is going to be a winning political issue, regardless of how it turns out for Democrats.
Yeah, let me give you one scenario where it might be. We did cover that poll earlier in the show. On the Young Turks, we covered that. And we did say that's a warning sign for Democrats. And Democrats are, A, terrible at messaging, so I'm not overly surprised by it. And B, Biden is perceived as weak overall, and it's bleeding into foreign policy, when actually he's pretty good at foreign policy and pretty strong in foreign policy, in my opinion. I think on domestic policy, he is actually weak and gets pushed around to no end. So, but if Biden pulls this off, because right now he's walking a very hard tightrope here, but pulling it off for now. It's only 5 days in, because you don't want to go to World War III. You don't want to get mired in Ukraine. You'd lose everybody if if we got into a war with Russia. That's insane, right? On the other hand, the financial transactions have been pretty brutal. The sanctions, I should say, and it looks like they're already hurting Russia real bad. So if he gets Russia and Putin to back down here, does that wind up being a huge win for Biden?
That's a scenario that's possible, but I don't know how likely that is. And I also think that by November, inflation and where we are in COVID are going to play bigger roles in the election than what's going on with, assuming it doesn't blow up even more than it already has, what's going on in Ukraine.
I got you, but okay, then I'm curious, what's your take on how Biden's handled this so far?
I have no major problems so far. I mean, I think this is mostly a Ukrainian situation where it's amazing that they put up the resistance they have. I think Putin bit off more than he can chew, and hopefully Putin has actually overstepped his bounds and, much like a liberal, overplayed his hand, and it'll come back to haunt him. That's what I'm hoping for.
All right, I got you. I'm hoping he pulls it off. We don't go into World War III, and that Ukraine is safe. But
we're on that we can agree.
Yeah, and and I'll end on another thing we can agree. Every line coming out of the Ukrainians is awesome. So Russian warship, go F yourself. Here, take some sunflower seeds, put it in your pocket, because I want beautiful sunflowers to grow when you all die here. That was a little old lady in Ukraine. God, I love these guys. And then I suspect that this warms right-wing hearts. When Zelensky was called by the Americans and they asked him, "Do you need an evacuation?" He said, "I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. The real fight is here." How much do you love that, John?
I loved it. More of it. Thank you. And I totally agree with you.
Yeah, that could bring us together. There you go. All right. John Ziegler, thank you, brother, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Cenk.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.